Hi again, everyone, and welcome to Los Angeles and Badger Breakdown. I'm Mike Lucas for UWBadgers.com. I'm joined by the voice of the Badgers, Matt Lepay. Man, a lot of people weren't sure if the Badgers could make it back to this game, the Rose Bowl, and midpoint of this season, you can tell why. There's good questions about the club. Now that they're here, can they benefit from maybe last year's experience in addition to what they experienced this year?
Most of the guys that we've talked to, I think, say yes. You know, there's a wide-eyed nature the first time you're here, understandably so. But now for those veterans, they've been here. Now, this is the first trip for Russell Wilson, but we don't tend to worry about him all that much. I still think, Mike, that said, it's probably that makes it a wash. Oregon's been there, done that. They played here 2 years ago. They played the national title game a year ago. So you hope for the Badgers' sake that the wide-eyed nature isn't there. I don't know if that gives them any kind of an advantage, but it prevents it from being a real disadvantage for those guys.
I agree with you. You can't talk about this matchup. You absolutely cannot talk about this matchup without talking about speed. Now, I'm not going there, speed versus size, because I think the Badgers have some speed and athleticism too. But how do the Badgers defensively compensate? How do they compete with the type of speed that Oregon's going to play on the field?
$64,000 question, right? Can the defense make plays in space? That's what we'll be asked to do. And Oregon, too, Mike, they're known for their perimeter game, but they can run it. They can go between the tackles. Michael James and Kenyon Barner are not big, burly running backs, but they're strong enough, and that offensive line, while not mammoth, is big enough. They play fast. They can get to the edge, but they can also play fast and go between the tackles. So it'll be interesting to see how Wisconsin manages that. To me, a big key here is turnovers. Can Wisconsin knock the ball out, get a couple extra possessions that way? Because I don't know, quite honestly, if either defense is going to stone the other for 3 hours. It's just hard to imagine that happening.
Well, most of the national pundits are really focusing on Oregon's speed on offense and how are the Badgers going to handle it. But Oregon has to play defense. They're going to have to find a way to slow down Wisconsin's offense.
And the trick of that, and really no one has been able to do that for 4 quarters. At times teams have done it. Michigan State at times did it. Ohio State in the game in October at times did it. But you still have to respect the balance. Now, this isn't an offense that's going to have Oregon's tempo. But the running ability is very obvious. Russell Wilson as a threat, not just to throw the ball, but when he has to, he can run it. You have to account for Nick Toon, Jared Abbrederis, Jacob Pedersen, running backs out of the backfield. It's a different kind of headache that Oregon's defense will face, but it's a headache nonetheless. These teams score in the 40s per game. They do it in a different way, but they're both very, very productive.
And the one thing that can impact field position more than anything else is the return game. And this is something we've talked about frequently this year. Special teams and how special they could be, or maybe not so special.
DeAnthony Thomas, 2 kick returns for touchdowns this season, 1 against Washington State and 1 against USC. Jared Abbrederis with 1 punt return for a touchdown, and another one that was called back. So again, Oregon gets the attention there, but Abbrederis is the 3rd best punt return man in the country in terms of average per return. Again, we talked about turnovers, and this is where Wisconsin maybe can make something happen. Connor O'Neill's been kind of pivotal in special teams in the last 2 games, knocked the ball out. So maybe, again, that you look for potential turning points, and maybe they can create something big on special teams.
If the Badgers have the better quarterback in the Rose Bowl, if Russell Wilson outplays Darren Thomas, is that going to be enough necessarily?
It's definitely enough to stay in the hunt. You know, I think it's definitely enough to stay in the hunt, because let's look at the 2 games that they didn't win. Russell Wilson did everything he could to win. He was at his best when the situation looked at its worst. Down 14 points in the 4th quarter against Michigan State, down 12 in the 4th quarter against Ohio State. So you probably shouldn't assume things, but if you're going to make an assumption that Russell's going to be ready to play very, very well. He hasn't had a bad game. He's had a couple of tough stretches, but he hasn't had a bad game. But I think Oregon has so many weapons, as does Wisconsin. I don't know if their quarterback has to be great because of James, Barner, and the receiving core. I don't think that alone is going to guarantee a win for Wisconsin.
And when you have elite running backs like Monty Ball and Michael James, they both embrace gamesmanship, and I think they will be motivated by the other. Don't you agree?
Oh yeah, I think so. You know, Monty Ball, 38 touchdowns, 1,700 plus yards rushing. Michael James with his per game average, and you know, people have known about LaMichael James longer than they've known about Monty Ball, and yet it was Monty, the guy who was invited to New York. So I would imagine Mr. James probably wants to make a point but you know, Monty Ball down the stretch when they absolutely had to have him. He was there, he was big, and that's why he was one of the Heisman finalists.
Final two storylines. Number one, there's going to be a transition on the UW coaching staff with Paul Chryst and Bob Bostad going to Pitt. Can the team rally around that?
Can't hurt. You know, I think you know, Paul Chryst and Bob Bostad will do everything that they can to make it business as usual, get ready for the game day by day. But sure, I think, you know, the seniors, you rally around that, Mike, but you rally around the seniors who want to go out on a winning note.
Good point.
And this team wants to rally around the fact that it fell 2 points short last year. So I think, you know, they want to send Paul and Bob out on a great note, but they want to finish what they couldn't quite finish a year ago.
And one question that keeps coming up whenever Chip Kelly or Brett Bielema's at the podium: can you win the big? Can you win that big bowl game? They've had to answer that all week.
Both sides. And the Oregon guys, I think that term validate has come up, that word validate, and I think a couple of the Oregon players, you just got the impression they were bristling at that. Look, when you're really good, you're really good. We can get into semantics and all of that, but you have to win big games to get here. So they have won big games to get here. So the loser of this game is going to have to answer that question, but I think that's one of those things that gets a little bit overdone. Wisconsin had to win a dramatic game in Indianapolis to get here. Oregon had to win a ton of games. They're 33-6. I think there were some big games along the way.
Will this live up to the offensive expectations?
I think so. Sometimes when you hype something, you wonder, are we overdoing it here? But it reminds me in some ways of the '99 game UCLA and Wisconsin, and this one I would think is going to be that type of game, if not a little bit more, the peaks and valleys of it. I think it's going to be one of those, another one of those classic Rose Bowl.
Just great to be here and talking about it.
Can't beat the weather. This isn't too bad.
Can't beat the Rose Bowl. It's the granddaddy of them all. Let me be the first.
That's what they tell us. Yeah, that's what they tell us.
For Matt Lepay, I'm Mike Lucas. Thanks for watching UWBadgers.com and Badger Breakdown.